Turn your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. We're continuing our study of this book where Paul is bringing this down to a practical, everyday level of our Christianity, and he's talking about our walk. And he's looked at that walk in different ways. Walk in love, walk in submission is the section we're in now, which began back in 5:21, submitting to one another. He talked about wives submitting to their husbands, and now here in chapter 6, children submitting to their parents. And that's kind of where we left off last week. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth." And we were in the midst of discussing that when we ran out of time last week. But children are to be obedient, obviously, and honor their father and mother. We've talked about that before. There's at least two ideas involved in honoring your parents. Do you remember what they are?
One would be to show respect, and the other one would be to take care of.
Yeah. The first honor is kind of paralleling verse 1, obeying your parents. And of course, when he says honor your father and mother, that's a quote from the Old Testament, the book of Exodus chapter 20, in the Ten Commandments. And so he's quoting the Ten Commandments there to back up his statement about obeying your parents. And so honor your father and mother would certainly include respect or obedience to your parents. And then the second one, I think you said it again. What was it, the second one?
Take care of them.
Yeah, the second one was to provide for your parents. You honor them by taking care of them because they took care of you when you were young. And now when they get old and can't take care of themselves, then you step up and repay them. And 1 Timothy 5, verse 4, I think, talks about that. He says, let me find it here. Yeah, 1 Timothy 5, verse 4, "If any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God." I forgot to read the verse prior to that. Honor widows who are really widows. So honor there in that context is clearly talking about providing for your parents. So both ideas are involved in the word, but in the context of Ephesians 6, I think his primary focus is on obedience. But he adds in verse 2 that this is the first commandment with a promise. Now, when he says commandment, he's referring to the 10 Commandments. And he says this is the first one of the 10 that has a promise attached to it. And if you go back and read it, you'll see that verse 3 is also a quote from the 10 Commandments, and that's the promise. Okay, the first commandment with a promise. Well, what's the promise? That it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Parents usually aren't looking to hurt their children when they insist that they obey. They're trying to help their children, trying to teach them to know right from wrong, trying to teach them how to behave in a civilized society, and all of that is designed for you to have a long and healthy and useful life, so that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Mom and Dad's been down the road, and they've been around the block, as the old saying is, and so they know a little something that kids don't know. And sometimes kids think they know everything. You know, we all went through that phase in our teenage years. We think we know everything. And as we get older, we realize we knew very little. But our parents know. They've been down the road and they know, and so they're trying to look out for our well-being. So this is why you need to be obedient. There's two reasons given. Number one, in verse 1, this is right. And that's all the reason you need. God said so, and it's the right thing to do. And number two, that everything will be well and you'll live long. You know, if you don't teach your children some of these things, when they get to be in their teen years, one of the first things they're going to want to do because of the peer pressure around them, go get some alcohol or some drugs and get all doped up on that and then get behind the wheel of a car. And of course, mom and dad saying, no, don't do that. You do that, you're liable to get behind the wheel of a car and kill somebody. And that's not well. It's not well. And you'll live with that for the rest of your life. You may end up being killed yourself. So this is all for the benefit of our children. So this is why the obedience is enjoined here. Then he turns it back to the fathers. "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." So there's two sides to this. The first one, don't provoke your children to wrath. What does that really mean? What's he talking about there?
Don't be so mean to them all the time that they'll resent you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And sometimes parents are that way. They get so focused on the obedience side of it, and that's certainly important, but there's no reinforcement. There's no I love you. There's no good job. There's no I'm proud of you. It's just always negative. And that'll wear on a child after a while. Children need reinforcement. They need encouragement. They need the I love yous. They need the hugs. They need the good job. Keep it up. They need all of that as well. And if you never give any of that and you're always the negative, then they're going to grow up to resent you. And that's really what he's driving at there. Don't make your children resent you by being so hard and so mean and so ornery to them. Just because you can, just because you're the boss, they're going to end up hating you and resenting you for that. So don't do that. But instead, bring them up. Now notice, bring them up. So this is the idea of their growing up. And so this tells us something. When does this training start? Yeah, it starts very early on. Yes, almost as soon as they're born. You start in on this. So you don't wait till they're teenagers and try to tell them right from wrong. You don't let them run wild until they get to be teenagers, and then you think you're going to put the hammer down. What's that going to cause? That's going to cause rebellion, because you've let them get by with stuff all these years, and now you're going to put the hammer down? You got to start early and bring them up. In the training and the admonition of the Lord, what the New King James says, the word training is discipline. And some versions will say that, the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So this involves corrective measures. And there's different ways to correct a child. Sometimes you can correct them verbally. Sometimes you have to correct them by removing privileges. Sometimes you correct them by swatting them on the backside. And all of those things are authorized there. The discipline, correction, corrective measures. People today say, well, spanking is abuse. Well, it's not. It's not child abuse to spank a child on the backside. Now, I'm not talking about beating them to death. I'm talking about spanking them. And spanking is not child abuse, despite what some of the so-called experts would have us to believe. It will help them and it will do them good. But they need that. They need the corrective measures, the training. Now, with Cody, he got to a point, of course, you know how big he is. He got to a point where the spankings didn't do a whole lot. But you could remove some privileges and that'd kill him. He couldn't stand it. No TV, no video games, and that just killed him. He couldn't hardly stand that, so that we had to kind of switch off because he got so big, the spankings didn't faze him much. So you had to switch off to something else, and removing those privileges, that killed him. He couldn't take that. So there's always a way to do things. Yes?
Just one child, I think, is a little different than people with multiple kids because every kid is different. You can do
Absolutely
something
true,
that don't phase the other one. You can do something other than this one that don't phase it.
Yeah.
There's different things that you do at different times to each child. And just one size fits all. A lot of people don't understand that.
No, I think you're right. It is true. You have, every child is different. There's some kids you just look at them cross-eyed and they start crying. And then there's other kids you can practically, again, metaphorically speaking, beat them upside the head and they don't get it. They're stubborn. And so there is a difference there. And Cody had all these friends, just to kind of make the point. He had all these friends that hung out with him, and they always hung out at our house. Our house was the hangout place. So I referred to them affectionately as the chuckleheads. But they were all different, And they were scared to death of me. I don't know why, but they were scared to death of me. But if I raised my voice, they'd all straighten right up. But yeah, you're right. Each one was different. Each child was different. Yes?
I think that goes right along. What he was just pointing out there goes right along with the one that says to be an elder or deacon, you must have children.
Yeah.
It's plural.
Yeah. Well, I disagree with that conclusion. But I disagree with your conclusion, but I understand what you're saying.
If I got one kid, one child, she's got one personality.
Yeah.
What I do to lead her might not be the same as what it would be where he's got three.
Yeah.
He knows how to rule them for different personalities.
True. I get what you're saying, but if your argument's worth a hoot, then you'd have to have as many kids as there are members of the congregation.
What are you talking about?
Different personalities.
I don't understand.
Well, you talk about the kids having different personalities. Well, the congregation, they all have different personalities. So I'd have to have as many kids as there are members of the church. So I know how to govern each personality. I disagree with that too, but that's the point. That's the logical conclusion of what you've said.
I agree with what he said. Everybody's got their own opinion.
Sure.
On the elder thing, but I do think it's not just one child. If it was a child, it would say in there, be a parent or a father. Being a parent or father would be one. It says having children.
I know it says having children. If you ask me the question, Lanny, do you have children? The answer is yes. The answer is not no. The answer, that would be incorrect.
You've got a child, you don't have children.
I do have children. When I fill out a form that says, do you have children? The answer is yes. The answer is not no. So anyway, we just differ on that. And that's fine with me. I don't care. But we differ on that. I just don't buy that conclusion. Go ahead.
Just got another question, man. So when did we, when we're studying the Bible, when do we know when there is a word that is plural, when we use it as being plural, or when it's singular, when do we use it as being?
Well, how about verse 1 right there? Children. What if you just have one child? Do they have to obey? Of course.
Well, I'm just talking about the difference.
It's talking about all kids and nothing.
Yeah,
I think everybody use their head and see what that's talking about.
Oh, exactly. But it is using the plural, children. Does one child have to obey? Of course. So the plural includes the singular. And that's how you know. How about, we were looking at 1 Timothy 5 earlier. Let's flip over there real quick. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 4. If any widow has children, there it is again, or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and repay their parents. Well, if she only has one child, does he have to repay his parents? Well, of course he does. Of course he does. So the plural can include the singular. Now, I'm not trying to change your mind on elders. You believe what you want to about that. I don't care. But I'm just showing you that the arguments don't hold up. Okay. Sure.
In general stuff, like the children don't obey your parents, I think people knows it. It don't say every child will obey your parents. It's talking about man in general. He said man, it don't mean.
But it's still the word children.
Well, I know, but you tell me when he says, when the Bible's talking about mankind, they don't say just one person.
I know. But you can see the word children there. You can see it. You're admitting you see it. Children includes the one. But you're admitting that you see it.
Well, it's going to be hard to study
Yeah.
different ones that, if we're.
I don't want to get caught up on that.
Right,
Just
right.
bring it up,
Well, you all brought it up, so I'm just.
the children about being disciplined
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
We talk about the rest of the.
Yeah, we could. We could. But, that would be not producing a whole lot of good. We'd still end up disagreeing in the end. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I've got one child too, but you know what? It's a lot harder if you'd have two.
Well, there's no doubt about that.
Because they're all so different.
Yeah,
and you
there's
have
no doubt about that.
the way you do.
Yes.
So it is so much harder if you've got more than.
Oh, without a doubt. No doubt about that, for sure.
'Cause
It is harder to have more than one. Yes.
The wonderful thing about having or knowing the differences between multiple children is you've spent the time necessary to know that this child and this child and this child. So, and sort of the same thing would work with an elder. If that elder is going to determine all his decisions on one, then he's going to be wrong. But if he takes the time to learn the entire congregation, then he's going to learn those people, and he's gonna know how to deal with the individuals.
Yeah, yeah. There's no doubt that having more than one child gives you more experience, but that's not the issue with the qualification, 1 Timothy 1, or 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. But yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying. More children, obviously, you have more exposure and more experience with, there's no doubt about that. I wouldn't argue that for a second. I think that's true, yes.
This is probably gonna get sticky, but it don't really have anything to do with the discussion. It does and it don't. If you see children or one child that is a single child, that person also, as a single child, has a different way of looking things when they're older out into the world. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad.
Right.
The plural children, you can, because they have a sibling, you can tell the people in the world who's never had a sibling.
Yeah.
You can see that in
Sure.
the way that was brought up and taught and stuff. And I'm not saying that's bad or good, but you can tell.
Absolutely.
You can tell.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that is true. You can see that. Anything else before we move forward? Okay. We'll just have to agree to disagree on that, and that's fine. I mean, it doesn't bother me that someone disagrees with me. I don't care. It doesn't make a bit of difference to me because none of us are perfect, and I could be mistaken or you could be mistaken. The Lord knows for sure. But in verse, go ahead.
I don't say this to step on no toes, it's just the way I look at it, the way I would look at it. I wouldn't want to do anything that could possibly jeopardize me and my relationship with God over something other that you don't have to do.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I wouldn't want to do something that I thought would jeopardize my relationship with God either. I just don't agree with the other conclusion. I'm comfortable with that, in other words. But yes, I don't think we ever want to do anything that would jeopardize our relationship with God. That's true.
Commanded that you have to be an elder is what I
Right. Yeah. Verse 4, I think we weren't finished with that. Bring them up in the training. We talked about the training, the admonition. Some versions say instruction. So children get training by act, that's the corrective measures, and they get training by word, admonition, instruction. Both are involved, both are necessary, and both are required. Anything else on the this part of it, verses 1 through 4? Okay, verse 5, servants and masters, again continuing that thought about submissiveness. Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart as to Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he's slave or free. And you masters do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master is also in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. In Bible times, slavery was a common thing. In all cases, it wasn't always bad. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. If a nation went in and conquered another nation, sometimes they would take their people as slaves. And obviously that usually was not a favorable thing because of the treatment of the slaves. Sometimes in slavery, such as situations like this, you would sell yourself into slavery. It was almost like their welfare program. They didn't have, like we do in our country, where you can go sign up for welfare. What you do is become someone's slave. And in exchange for your labors, you would be given food and a roof over your head. So there was a relationship that was established. You could, and sometimes it was a matter of paying off a debt or something like that. So it wasn't always a horrible thing, as we've sometimes been told. Nobody wants to be a slave, don't misunderstand me, but it wasn't always an abusive thing. And right here, God is regulating the practice. He's saying it's not right. If you have slaves, you shouldn't abuse them. And if you are a slave, you should be a good one. You should be good at what you do. So wherever you are in Christ, when you become a Christian, you should be the best at what you are. And if you're a servant, then so be it. Be a good servant. So bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh. Do it with fear and trembling. Give me another word for fear in this context.
Reverence.
Reverence, respect, yeah, this is the ideal. Not that you're scared to death that your master's going to beat you, because he tells him, the masters later on, that that's a big no-no. But he's saying here with respect and trembling, make sure that you're afraid to disobey, in the sense that because it's going to displease God.
They said, fear God and keep his commandments.
Yeah, same idea. It's a reverential respect type of thing, yeah. In sincerity of heart as to Christ. Notice that. Obey your master just like you would obey Christ. So you need to, that's the standard. Just as surely as you would obey Christ, you would obey your master in the flesh. Now in today's culture, that easily translates over into the workplace, because when you go to work for somebody, say 8 hours a day, in effect you're his servant for that time. That's what you're serving him, and he pays you a wage. It's a little different, but it's similar, and it's similar enough that you can apply those principles today to the workplace. So if you go to work for somebody, you need to be a good employee. Be the best employee you can be. Give your boss your best. And we'll find out in a moment, he's supposed to treat you with decency too. So it's about mutual respect. Not with eye service. What in the world's eye service?
Just to be seen of men.
Yeah. And sometimes I put it this way, just when the boss is watching. That's eye service. You know, you sit back, kick back in the chair and put your feet up on the desk, and then when you see the boss coming, your feet come down, you grab a file and act like you're busy. That's eye service, just when the boss is watching, see. Don't do that as men pleasers, because you're not just trying to please men, you're trying to please God. But as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Notice again, he brings it back to Christ. Just as surely as you would obey Christ, and just as surely as you are a bondservant of Christ, so you should obey your master in the flesh. With goodwill doing service, there it is again, as to the Lord. Just as if you were his slave, because you are. So, as to the Lord and not to men. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he's slave or free. So God is watching this. God is watching the slaves. Make sure you're obedient and doing the best you can. So it has to do with, we may be at different stages in life, different statuses, but we all have to be the best person we can be in whatever status we're in. I was trying to think, the thought was there and it's gone. Verse 9, he turns it around to the masters. You masters, or you bosses, we might say, do the same thing to them, giving up threatening. Now notice, you're not supposed to be abusive to your employees or to your slaves. Do the same thing to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master is also in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So both parties answer to God. Whether slave or free, they answer to God. He's watching, and God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't care if you're master or slave. He's watching how you behave. Make sure you conduct yourself in the right way. Now, I always like to bring up, when we talk about things like this, think about the implications of this. Here you are in the master-slave relationship. Out in the field, you might be somebody's slave. But when you come into the congregation, you could be qualified to be an elder. Look at the, and this is how God can turn things on its head. Think about that. How the master, he may not be qualified, but the slave is qualified, and he would be an elder. So in the congregation, he would be in the oversight position, but out in the field, he may not be. Now, I'm not saying that's the way it was every time. I'm saying that's a possibility. That's a possible scenario. That could happen. And that, I find that to be interesting and fascinating.
But either way, they would have been fellow brethren.
Yes, they would have been.
Even if either one was
Yeah.
an elder or deacon in the church, they would have been
Fellow brethren.
equal fellow brethren in the church.
Yes, and the whole point is that we all treat each other as brothers and sisters. We have respect, no matter what your station in life. Whether you be master, whether you be slave, whether you be rich, whether you be poor, whatever, we all treat one another the same. So there is no partiality with God. There should not be with us. Anything else on that section there?
Verse 8, where it said, the same he shall receive of the Lord. Is that putting, that if you do good, you get better from the Lord?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so like a merit system, where you get more stars in your crown, so to speak. Yeah, I never did buy into that, but I see what you're saying there. Whatever good anyone does, he'll receive the same from the Lord. I think it's just the idea that God rewards good behavior and punishes bad behavior. I think that's the idea. I could be missing something here, but I never did buy into the fact of degrees of reward. Now, some of our Baptist friends buy into that big time, where you know, and even that old song that people used to sing, "Will there be any stars in my crown?" That's all based on reward merit. You know, I've got more stars than you because I did more than you, and I don't think it's that way. We get into heaven by, it starts with a G, grace. We don't get into heaven by merit. We get into heaven by grace. Yes, sir.
If you want to be blessed, be a blessing.
That's good. That's exactly what he's saying. That's a good way to put it.
Well, I think, this passage, it says that even if you give a glass of water in my name, your reward not going unnoticed. I mean, I think he will reward and acknowledge and know of any good that we might do.
Yeah.
If anything we do for his cause, he'll reward us for it.
Yeah, and I think that it's not getting back to my original premise, it's not a merit-based system where you get a fancier mansion in heaven or anything like that. I don't think that's the way it works. And the same thing works with hell. I don't think that there's cooler spots in hell for people who weren't that bad. Hell is hell and heaven is heaven. And I never did buy into the degrees of punishment and degrees of reward. Was your hand up?
Thing went along with the apostles too, some of them. You know, the
Yeah. Yeah, all the things they did. And
well, there was the parents, you know, which is going to be what can they do to get mine, you know, to have a higher place that beside you or closer to you, whatever, to the throne. And what he told them pretty much was, whoever the least of you, be first.
yeah.
And pretty much telling them, in my opinion, it didn't matter. Do what I tell you to. You don't try to be the best.
Yeah.
Try to be the most humble or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think you're right. I think you're right on with that. Anything else? That's what you go and then you go.
It says, I forgot where it was at, somewhere where I think it's in Matthew, but before he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you," you know, he said, "Well, I've done all these good things. You know what I'm saying?"
Matthew 25.
Yeah.
Matthew 25.
Yep.
And then he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you," because you didn't do it in his name.
Right. Yeah, it was.
You do all these good things and still go to heaven.
Yeah, it's heaven or hell, and there's no degrees of that. And then I lost track of your thought there. What was the other part? Now you lost track of it too, didn't you? But we're on the same page then.
Where he's giving in that analogy or whatever he's giving, he's talking about all them doing good deeds to all the people around them.
Yeah.
You know, and the good ones said, "Well, when did we see you this way, Lord?
Yeah.
When did we see you?"
Yeah, that was it.
When did you see you? And he made the point to both. He's making the point, you done it unto my brethren, you done it, unto me. And that's so what we do that's right and that's good is doing it unto Christ.
Yeah.
We need to understand that.
There used to be a song, but it's not really so much sung as it was spoken. Some of you older ones might remember this. It was always played at Christmas time. Grandpa Jones. Anybody ever remember that song? It's Christmas Guest. Man, that thing makes me cry every time I hear it. But this fellow was going to he said the Lord was going to come. He said he dreamed that the Lord was going to come. And it was some beggar at the door. And he fed him and sent him away. And then somebody else was lost, and he helped them find their way. Y'all remember that one? And then and the Lord never came. And he said, "Lord, why didn't you come?" And he said, "I came 3 times. Yeah, I was the little beggar. And boy, you're just bawling and crying, but it gets the point across. You do it unto Christ. What you do unto men, you do unto Christ." Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Verse 10. Now we move into that. And if you want to, it doesn't actually say this, but if you want to keep with that walk theme that we were talking about, walk in love and walk in submission, you could say here in verse 10 and following, walk in warfare. Now, it doesn't use that language, it doesn't use that expression, but the ideal is there. As Christians, we are warriors. There is a war going on against God against Satan, and Satan against God. And we're pawns in that war. We're pawns in that battle. And we need to be aware of that. We need to understand the other side of this, Satan and his minions, they're not looking out for you. He wants to destroy you. He hates your guts. And so wise up and understand that you are at war. And the sooner you wise up and arm yourself with the armor of God, the better off you'll be. The devil's not a nice guy. Yes?
The winning side is with the lower heat, and if you'd like to be a winner,
Yeah.
you better pick the right side.
Well, by the way, I just remembered, I forgot to come back to you. Did you have something you wanted to say earlier?
Okay, but what I was gonna say on the doing good part, and in comparison with this, when you're, so if you was a master and had slaves, you would have, I guess, the good that God would bless you with. If you was good, you would have desirable people to come work for you. Good people with desire. I want, you would get good quality workers. Well,
Yeah.
if you was doing the bad, then you would attract, well, I gotta go where and work for, I gotta live and be, he's gonna be my master, and well, there's the word, even, where God will bless you if you're doing good, and if you don't, this way will happen. It's the same thing in any kind of business. If you do good,
Yeah, you'll attract good employees.
come to you.
Yeah.
I look at that passage kind of like what you said.
Yeah, that's a good point. You attract the kind of people, and the abusive masters also, they were the ones that everybody wanted to escape from. I want to get away from him. I don't want to be around this guy. But the good ones, they wouldn't mind. They'd stay. In fact, there was a provision in the Old Testament. If you were a slave and you got set free, if you could choose to stay with your master, and they would pierce your ear. You ought to have a sermon on that here a while back. And so you could choose because he treated you right. See, you could choose to stay. Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, if you had a master, ain't he responsible for you? If you, I guess if the slave gets in trouble with the authorities, do they hold the master accountable?
That one I'm not sure about. I've never looked into it that deep. I don't know. But it's possible. Okay. But verse 10, walk in warfare. And so first of all, put on God's armor. Verse 10 through 13. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Now, one thing I want you to notice in those 3 or 4 verses I just read there, 3 times he says stand, okay? And the idea was, we'd say it today, stand your ground, okay? And so, verse 11, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. In verse 13, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. And then at the end of the verse, having done all, to stand. And then, look at the next verse. Stand therefore. So he actually does it 4 times. Stand, 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 stand. This is a soldier's job. You withstand the enemy. That's your job. And we are soldiers in the Lord's army. And we are supposed to stand our ground and fight against the devil. This is not a job for softies. This is not a job for people who are wishy-washy about the truth. You got to stand for the truth, you see. And so be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Notice that our strength comes from him. We're strong in him. We're strong in his might. It's his power, okay, that's going to help us here. We're in a battle with forces that are beyond our comprehension. You know, early on when I came here, we had a study on the spiritual realms. And we talked about angels and demons and all of the spiritual realm out there that we don't even see. It's there and it's involved in our lives, but we don't even see it. So there's this whole spiritual realm, and the devil's a part of that, and the demons are part of that. And so you look at verse 12, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. You're not just fighting human enemies here. You're fighting spiritual enemies. The principalities and the powers and the rulers of the darkness of this age. This is Satan and his minions, okay? Against spiritual hosts, and the word host there, that means there's a bunch of them, okay? Spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Out there in the spiritual realm, I think, is the idea of that verse, heavenly places there. So know what you're up against here. You can't do this on your own. You have to stand in the power of the Lord and in His might. And so you put on His armor that He's provided. God has graciously provided this armor for us. And Paul, you think about this, this is one of the prison epistles. So Paul is probably chained to a Roman guard as he writes this letter. And he's probably wearing this armor. And so Paul said, well, that'd make a good little lesson to put in as he's writing this letter. He's looking at the Roman guard and said, well, he's wearing a breastplate and he's wearing a sword. And so he turned that into a little lesson here. And so he's talking about the armor of a Roman soldier to illustrate our armor of God that He has given us. I'm looking at the clock. I think I better, there's some kids standing out there. I think I better quit right about here before we go any further. All right.